So a common question I get is, how do I build a coalition in negotiation? Many negotiations involve more than just two parties. And so whenever you have three or more parties present in a negotiation, there is the possibility of coalition formation. Today, I'm going to share with you when you might want to build a coalition in a negotiation, and then I'll give you steps on how to build a successful and sustainable and winning coalition. So let's start with the first basic question, which is, when should I build a coalition in a negotiation? Typically, there are two reasons for doing so. One is when you cannot get what you want done on your own, or two, when you need some legitimacy or cover for what you're doing. And if you look historically, those are the two reasons why people build coalitions. So in many cases, the United States can engage militarily around the world unilaterally, meaning it can get done what it wants to get done without the help of another country. Despite that, there are many times when the United States will work hard to build a coalition because the coalition actually puts a veneer of legitimacy on the action it's taking. Other times, actually, the United States needs a coalitional partner. So, for example, during the Persian Gulf War, the United States needed some coalitional partners, if for no other reason than we needed to have bases in order to refuel and resupply our troops. So, with that background, let's talk about how do you build coalitions. Step number one is targeting the right coalitional partners. So how do you do this? First, it means really looking at who are the parties at the negotiation table and who are the other stakeholders who might influence those parties at the negotiation table. And once I do that, what I want to do is identify what are the issues to be negotiated in this negotiation. What are the interests of all of these stakeholders in the negotiation? And then I want to identify people whose interests are highly aligned with my interests and people who have a lot of influence or power with the other people at the negotiation table. That set of people are my key allies. Those are the people that I want to target to be in my coalition. Now, this sounds really easy to do, but a lot of people really miss this stakeholder assessment phase. And it's incredibly important, right? I have sometimes come in a consulting environment and I see someone trying to bring someone onto a coalition, and I'll ask them, like, why are you spending so much time and energy on this? And they'll be like, well, she's a really good person, or we really like her. And that's lovely. But the really good question is this person somebody who actually is in agreement with you, and do they have a lot of power in this particular negotiation environment? If the answer to those questions is no, then these are not the stakeholders you want to start with. The second thing is, once I've identified who I want in the coalition, I need to think about what is the relationship between these people. This really matters because I want a coalition that will actually hold. I don't want a coalition that's going to fall apart immediately. So to give you an example, in the first Persian Gulf War, so this is after Iraq invaded Kuwait, and then American President George H.W. Bush wanted to invade Iraq. He decided that he needed to build an important global coalition for this. And as he looked at coalitional partners, it turned out that there were some moderate Arab states who would support the United States. And then there was our most natural coalitional partner in the region, Israel. But at the time, if you looked at the relationship history, having a coalition that involved moderate Arab states and Israel would not be a very strong coalition because it would be too fragile. And so what the United States wisely decided to do was to work really hard to actually keep Israel out of the coalition, because the coalition would hold more if it did not have that internal tension of moderate Arab states and Israel. The other thing you want to be thinking about around relationship history is what is the basis primarily of this coalition? What we know from experience and from research is that coalitions that are most likely to hold are coalitions that are based on long-term values versus what I would call a coalition of convenience. So what is a coalition of convenience? Well, in the early 1980s, it turns out that the United States entered into a coalition with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan. Those of you who are scholars or nerds in this area know that the Mujahideen would later become the Taliban. This is a very unlikely coalition for the United States, except for one reason, that in the 80s, after the Soviet Union had invaded Afghanistan, the United States and the Mujahideen had a common enemy, which was the Soviet Union. But this was not a coalition based on long-term shared values. And as soon as that enemy was defeated, the coalition fell apart. Contrast this with the coalition of the NATO coalition. The NATO coalition involving the European nations and the United States has held together since World War II because it's not just around issues of convenience, but also shared long-term democratic values. Third, when forming a coalition, once you've identified who you want in the coalition and ensured that the relationship between those parties will hold, you need to sequence your invitation strategy. And this is when you want to engage patterns of deference in deciding who to approach first. Okay, this sounds really fancy. It actually isn't all that fancy at all. All it means is that if, for example, I need to get person X on board, I may not have a lot of influence with person X, but I need to think who is in person X's ambit, who person X actually defers to. So that might be person Y. Okay, do I know person Y? I really don't. Okay. Who is in person Y's ambit, to whom person Y defers? And I do a real thorough analysis of this, and I'm like, oh, it's person Z. Do I know person Z? I do know person Z. Does person Z defer to me? Person Z defers to me. How am I going to build my coalition? I'm going to first go to person Z, knowing they defer to me. Then person Z is going to go to person Y, because I know that person Y defers to person Z. And then person Y will go to person X, and I know that person X defers to person Y. Now I have X, Y, and Z in my coalition. So that's what we mean by patterns of deference. So, to conclude, when building a coalition in a negotiation, you want to think about three things. First, how do I identify who my coalitional partners are? I want to identify stakeholders whose interests are aligned with mine and who have a lot of influence with the other people at the negotiation table. Second, when building that coalition, I want to make sure that the relationship between the parties in the coalition is one that is sustainable and can hold. And then third, once I've done this, I want to think strategically about who to approach first, second, and third, leveraging patterns of deference to build the winning coalition. Okay, before you leave, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and ring the bell so you don't miss any new content, and keep on watching to learn more on how to improve your negotiation skills. Okay, keep watching. Click, click, click.